I'm just gonna stick with it. I like it.
Yeah.
It's perfect for the weather, right? It's like,
Holding on to the last bit.
Okay, this meeting is being live streamed. Whoop.
All right, you guys are ready to go.
Okay. This is a meeting of the East Bay Regional Park District Board Legislative Committee on Friday, October 15th, starting at 12:35 or approximately. And I would like, we're going to be meeting under the governor's instructions that we can meet in this fashion by teleconference under the AB 361. And there are ways that members can join us and be heard or speak. And Yuli, would you please give those instructions?
Yes, and I apologize in advance if my volume is a little wonky. Yes, one way would be to send an email to me, probably the best way, at ypadmore@ebparks.org. You're also able to access on the front page of our website the legislative committee meeting, and that will take you to the information which will provide a Zoom and a YouTube of your preference. Thank you.
Okay. And shall we have a roll call to see who's in attendance from the board?
Absolutely. So we will start with President Rosario.
Here.
Director Waspy.
Here.
And Chair Wieskamp.
Here. Okay, we are about to begin this meeting. Softly or loudly, whatever works.
Yes,
And
and I'll just mention that we do have other members of the committee who are.
Oh, okay. Would you like to introduce them?
Yes, please. So we have Chief of Legislative and Government Affairs, Eric Feeler, who is here. Our Legislative and Policy Management Analyst, Lisa Baldinger, is here. Our Legislative Assistant, Flora Chontoch, is here. And we have both our federal advocate, Peter Umhofer, and our state advocate, Doug Houston.
Okay. Anybody else join us today or not?
We will have possibly, maybe, I mean, this is the committee, so.
Okay.
If anybody else speaks up.
We'll introduce appropriately.
Yes, we'll ask them to introduce their names.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, first item is state legislation.
Well, for today's, Eric Feeler, Chief of Government and Legislative Affairs, for today's committee meeting, we're meeting after the legislature has adjourned. So there are no new bills to consider, but we do have our advocate, Doug Houston, here to report on some of the action that took place this year in the legislature, and then also a discussion about the budget and the trailer bills that recently were enacted that provide a lot of resources for programs that we work on, frankly. So with that, I'll send it over to Doug. I believe he has may have a PowerPoint for the overview, I believe.
Yep. And my apologies in advance. The PowerPoint's not going to sync up entirely with the agenda. I think I prepared it in advance of receiving the agenda. So, but we're just going to do a general wrap up, legislative and budget wrap up. So if you'll bear with me, go ahead, Yuli. You can proceed to the next slide. That'd be great. So I think if I said that this year was a banner year, it'd be a bit of an understatement. You know, I think $50+ billion surplus certainly helped to grease the skids in a lot of ways and make a lot of people in the state of California very happy. And it's projected there may be another surplus next year. So there might be even more happiness and joy in Mudville next year. So we're looking forward to continued engagement with our legislative delegation and the legislature next year. So of course, just to kick it off and really highlight, emphasize a couple of the activities that we are engaged in this year because of that budget surplus. We managed to work with our legislative delegation in securing 2 direct allocations from the budget, the $10 million to address and mitigate for tree mortality, and then $3.5 million legislator Rebecca Bauer-Cahan had worked on for fire equipment upgrades. Since the budget was enacted and subsequent trailer bills, we've been in conversations with the entities that are charged with administering these funds. In the case of the $10 million, that will be Cal Recycle. It was kind of an odd fit. We weren't exactly sure why Cal Recycle would be administering these funds, and I think we're learning a little bit more as we're engaging with Cal Recycle, and we'll continue to engage with them in hopes of securing those dollars sooner than later so that we can proceed on some of the work that needs to be done out there. And then under the $3.5 million, that is going to be routed through Cal OES. And we've only more recently identified who's responsible and charged within Cal OES to administer these funds, and we're hoping to have a conversation with that individual very soon. Any questions on those 2 allocations? Very good. So, and I identified some other important investments in the budget. Of course, after, I don't know how long it's been, Director Weiss. Has it been 15 years, almost 2 decades?
Probably.
And if not for the stellar testimony of Director Rosario, this would have never happened. His work on AB 1512 and providing some testimony on some of the advanced legislation was very helpful. So this was a problem in search of a solution, and fortunately, again, we had such a sizable surplus that I think everybody just wanted this to go away. So they threw a considerable amount of money at this problem. The bulk of it will be retained by the OHV community for the hope and intent of acquiring a future site and developing a future site in lieu of Tesla for OHV activities. Some money has also been directed to the Department of Parks, a very small amount, for doing some planning and potentially development of the Tesla site once the transfer takes place. So reason for celebration, very excited about that. Good work all around. I know that our assembly member and senator are very excited and very pleased that we weighed in as vociferously as we did on this issue. And I think it was really important that the Park District, as a very legitimate local agency, was front and center, provided a lot of legitimacy to the issue as well. So kudos to everybody.
Yeah, if I may say, I just want to thank staff for providing all the talking points for my, my advocacy.
Oh,
very helpful.
Really? They helped you?
Yeah. And then also I was telling Ann Wieskamp that when I was chair of the Alameda County Parks and Recreation and Historic Commission, I testified as the president of that organization way back when, advocating for Tesla then. So it's been a while.
Director Rosario knows how to testify.
And Doug, just on this, 2 things. One is also want to just acknowledge the entire board's leadership, and particularly and your leadership on this issue, as well as Celeste Garamendi's advocacy. But my question really, Doug, is the $1 million for planning. Do they have a timeline to do that? And how do we stay engaged in that effort to make sure that, you know, it doesn't, at the end of the day, the planning is, oh, here, Park District, so that we have some advanced knowledge of how that is proceeding?
Really good question. So this was part of the budget trailer bill package. It wasn't a budget junior bill, which means it's essentially has longer legs or shelf life, the funding. I think we're going to have an opportunity at some point to weigh in on the planning side of it. I don't know if today is the best time to try to engage with state parks. I think they're still a little hurt over this transaction from what I'm gathering, but there definitely will be time. And I think, you know, we'll want to engage them proactively as this evolves for sure. But excellent question, and we'll stay on top of it.
I think it's very important that we talk about all the potential interested parties getting an actual tour. Board members, some of us at least, had an excellent tour a number of years ago. And to get a naturalist there to point out the various important things that it has to offer and that we must remember is going to be helpful for everybody. So hopefully that will be the next step, to get that tour for all of us who care about it. And let's remember the friends of Tesla who've worked so hard over all these years, pulling in everybody they could possibly, and of course, Celeste. Just outstanding effort on everybody's part.
Absolutely. Well said. Moving on, another investment. This year, the legislature, working with the administration, elected to increase the current amount that was available through what's called the statewide park program. There is a grant cycle, and there may be announcements today on the awards and who was awarded through this program. There was $395 million originally proposed for this grant cycle, and they added another $150 million. We have at least, it's my understanding, Eric, or at least I think we have at least one application in under this program, and I can't recall which project it is. And the reason I bring this up is that, you know, with the additional buffer of $150 million, it just increases the odds that our project will get selected at the end of the day, our projects. So kudos to the legislature working with the administration. There's $154 million that is directed to the Department of Parks and Recreation for a program that's yet to be determined. And gathering some background on it, I caught wind of it very, very early in the process, before it was even in print. There was a conversation between the Speaker of the Assembly and the new Director Armando Quintero, on how to find ways, and I think it all boiled down to how to find ways to make state parks more relevant to urban populations. And so I think that will be the driving force behind some of these funds, is acquiring lands in urban settings to create new parks, working in closer partnership with those that have larger regional parks, perhaps in urban settings. And the language around this also stipulates that money can be available through local assistance grants. So it's potentially not all about state parks, that at the end of the day, if they see value in working with a public agency to help them to, again, gain relevancy in urban settings, while at the same time partnering with a local agency that might have more expertise in an urban setting, I think that's not off the table. So I think there's going to be guidelines that are going to need to be developed, but it's very, very, as the director told me, this is the concept's very nascent. I don't know if he expected this to be included in the budget, frankly, this year. So they're scrambling a bit to try to identify and make this a meaningful program within the next year.
Interesting.
Importantly, and you're all aware of this, good work out of our GR team and others, and hats off to Special Districts Association and CARPD. We're working very diligently in trying to right a wrong in some of the relief that was provided through the feds due to COVID and the fact that special districts were absent from that formula. $100 million, we're not sure how far that's going to go necessarily. We do believe that the district will be eligible based on the criteria that we've reviewed and analyzed to this point. But we just don't know what the size and scope of the need is out there. Around $350, $400 million, maybe more. But we just don't know at the end of the day how those funds are going to be allocated. So we're going to try to stay on top of that the best that we can.
I think, and David and Jeff, I believe, are here. I believe we applied, we submitted an application. The window was up until today, I think, actually.
Okay. Thank you. Good information. And then lastly, I know we worked very hard to try to secure some funding for the Bay Area program within the budget, and we'd heard some more substantial numbers, but ultimately, at least we got a toehold in the budget. There'll be $5 million available for the Bay Area program, but we didn't get slighted in this effort, as we'll move on to the next slide, or maybe possibly the next slide, really, if we can do that.
Okay.
So I'll get back to that point, but I just wanted to highlight some of the investments in this budget around wildfire and resiliency. They increased. So there was a bill, SB 901, which called for a minimum of $200 million invested in forest and wildfire resiliency on an annual basis up through 25, 26, I believe. They extended that out a couple of couple more years. They beefed up the available funds through the Forest Health Grant Program, as well as the Fire Prevention Program. These are both programs that we have applied for, and to date, because the funding hasn't been as substantial as it will be going forward, we haven't been successful. But what we're being told is that those projects are simply, they're in the queue, and that be patient, that the funding will be forthcoming at some point. Some more money that'll be available through the Department of Conservation through fire and forest capacity grants. We have received funding through this program. This is what's called a pipeline program. It doesn't really fund projects per se. It funds all the activities, the pre-activities that lead to the projects. So it's been a very valuable program, and it's being modeled elsewhere through Cala OES as well. And then 20 million for a prescribed fire pilot program here in the state, which will be of tremendous value to those. Yeah, Lisa.
If you don't mind jumping in, I do want to give credit to our grants department and our stewardship department, who were successful with one of our CAL FIRE fire prevention grants.
Okay, good.
We were able to secure $750,000 for district-wide vegetation mapping. So wanted to make sure the board was aware.
My apologies. I did see that. I was just looking through the list of grants, and yep, my apologies. Very good. Thank you.
I don't know how you keep track of all of them. It's amazing. Amazing.
And then, so that was fire resiliency, wildfire resiliency investments. And then on the climate side, there was a sort of an open-ended category of $768 million over the next 2 budget cycles for multi-benefit nature-based solutions and projects. There was a document that was released 2 days ago that sort of provided a roadmap in terms of what the state is going to be looking for going forward. In this area, on these categories, and we're a little uncertain how the money is going to be allocated, but in my conversation with the Natural Resources Agency 2 days ago, they had their grants team as well as their chief financial officer on there. They're going to do their best to try to route all this money through existing programs. So the question will come up, well, what does that mean? Would it be available to the conservancies? And yes, the money will be routed. $60 million over the next 2 years is going to the state conservancies, except for the State Coastal Conservancy, which will be getting its own allocation. So we're pleased with that. So in terms of what multi-benefit nature-based solutions mean, and these are some of I listed out some of the objectives that are identified and programmatically, and how some of that funding will flow. So stay tuned. It's a lot of money. I think the district is well poised and positioned to take advantage of some of these funds once they begin to flow and things begin to become a little bit more concrete. And what I was told is, be patient, that come January 10th, when the budget is released, everybody will have a better sense of what the administration, how they would like to see those funds spent. That doesn't mean at the end of the day that the legislature won't have its say, which they always do, but at least it'll give everybody pretty good sense of direction in terms of what the priorities are from the administration. And again, we hope to take full advantage of that. Yuli, next, please. So there we go.
I think Dee has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Eric.
Yeah, regarding the fire resilience, this is probably a question for Lisa. The vegetation mapping, is that going to be district-wide, or is it going to be just focusing on our established wildland-urban interface?
My understanding is that it's a district-wide effort.
Good, because the Park District is starting to get requests to mitigate dense vegetation in parks outside of our established WUI. Where I'm specifically talking about Briones and Sonol, and so it's good to see that we're addressing or looking at that.
And to expand, it's not only district-wide, it's also being done in partnership with other large landowners in Alameda and Contra Costa County. So we're partnering with SFPUC, East Bay Mud, and others. So it will not only be district lands, it's all of the lands in Alameda and Contra Costa is the end goal of the project.
Okay, great, thank you.
That's great.
How long will that take to do that project?
If we're successful in securing the additional funding needed, it will take about 1.5 to 2 years, is my understanding.
I'll make that when you are successful.
When we are successful, thank you.
Positive.
Lisa, how much more is needed?
A little less than 2 million additional is needed.
Yeah, okay. Great. We ready to proceed?
Sure.
Yes, thank you.
Great. So appreciate your patience. Back to the State Coastal Conservancy. I did mention that we did receive a small chunk of funds this year for the Bay Area program. But over the course of the next 2 years, I believe it's 350 million next year and then 150 the following. It could be inverse. The Coastal Conservancy will have additional funds to address priority projects within their jurisdiction. And some of the areas I've highlighted are where the money is intended to be spent. And that's both on the Bay Area Authority restoration projects, Bay Area program projects, and then also there's going to be monies that promote and develop non-motorized trails of state significance. So that's the Bay Trail. I know that Senator Wykowski has some interest in his district and Sabercat Trail and some connecting trails. I know that Senator McGuire in the north part of the state really wants to get up and running on what's called his Great Redwood Trail, which is a 300-mile trail corridor that runs between Santa Rosa to Eureka. It's pretty substantial, pretty ambitious project, but it's all good stuff. And hopefully we have some projects that will be eligible. And I'm intending to meet with their interim director next week to see if I can't shake the tree a little bit and get a little more information out of them in terms of what their intention is going forward. So I'll report back what I hear. Money, $250 million through the next couple budget cycles for the urban greening program. We have competed for these dollars in the past and been successful. Those monies generally are available to projects that are in disadvantaged communities or benefit disadvantaged communities. So our grants team has been very strategic and creative about going out and securing those fundings and identifying the proper projects so that they are competitive. And again, we have been pretty successful in this in that program. $353 million through WCB to help habitat and California species to adapt to climate change. They're the only agency in the state that has what's called continuous appropriation authority. So you give them money and they just allocate those monies to projects as they see fit. It doesn't have to be routed back through the legislature during the budget cycles. So they have a great amount of latitude. We've had really good success working with them and look forward to future success with them as well. And then a couple categories on extreme heat retreats and evacuation centers. I don't know how this is going to shake out. It's going to be administered through the Strategic Growth Council. It's a new program. I don't think it's for the creation of new centers. I'm thinking that instead that they'll look at existing public facilities and retrofitting them for extreme heat retreats and evacuation purposes. And then lastly, there's money for an extreme heat set aside, which is yet to be determined, but we're, again, through natural resources, we hope to learn more come January 10th. So I don't know how the district comports in terms of competing for these dollars because there's so little information associated with how they being the administering agencies intend to allocate the money. But we should know more in the coming months. Next.
Question?
Any questions, folks? That was my budget stuff. I should mention there was money intended in the budget for what's called active transportation, $500 million. Those funds could and would have probably benefited the district tremendously to help some of the segments of our motorized trail network. We're expecting that money to roll forward and probably be budgeted next year. Fingers crossed. So on to legislation. We had a couple bills. I'm listing 1512 as a co-sponsor bill because I know we worked very actively with the assembly member down there. Indeed, again, testified as one of the two principals, at least on one occasion, if not two, tried to advance this legislation. But on the first bill, worked closely with MidPen and some other agencies. Our GR team, their GR team worked very harmoniously, and the legal teams as well, in putting together a finished product that the governor signed, one of his earlier signatures during the, after the session had concluded. This bill just grants us new authority to initiate actions, legal actions, against those that conduct unlawful activities, unauthorized activities on our properties. That could be water diversions, it could be debris, taking debris out to our park properties. And prior to the legislation, if we needed to take action, we have cite and fine authority, but it never really led to anything. We'd have to initiate it through the county DA's office, and they're busy with much better, bigger and better, worse things. So we're really, I think the legal team's very happy and pleased to have this authority in their back pocket, and we're going to use it judiciously, but we're definitely going to use it, and it's very necessary moving forward. So good piece of legislation for sure. And then 1512, this was a precursor to the budget item of $31 million. It just sort of set the stage, the continued stage, because I think this was probably at least the fourth iteration of legislation over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, just to keep the dialogue going. And it was very helpful. The bill ultimately didn't advance because it didn't need to advance. The funding, along with the policy associated with the bill, was contained in the budget. So I'm glad we've put this behind us and look forward to bigger and better things out there at Tesla, for sure. On to the topic of fire. So I'm just giving you sort of a sampling of some of the things that we supported this year. There were more items. I just wanted to highlight a few of them. And to a bill that I'm mentioning here, they were all derived from the governor's Wildfire and Forest Resiliency Task Force. So there was a task force that was formed, advisory panel that was formed a year and a half ago to cobble together a bunch of action and actionable items to try to address wildfire in the state. And to a piece of legislation, these were some of the solutions that were put forward by the task force, such as, and I mentioned it earlier, AB 9. This codifies an existing program, the Regional Fire and Forest Capacity Program. So that hasn't been codified to this date. And again, there's going to be $60 million moving forward. It's a pipeline program to help entities to get in a position to take advantage of other types of funds and to implement project funds. It establishes a new position at the state fire marshal for wildfire mitigation preparedness. We've never had anybody in that sort of position in the state. The state just didn't have that sort of vision, and we're operating in a whole new paradigm now with fire behavior and the expanse and the rapidity of the fires that we're experiencing over the summer. So I think there's going to be more investment and try to mitigate for those purposes at all levels within CAL FIRE and without CAL FIRE. So this is one of those, an offshoot of that intention. And then the Wildfire Mitigation Advisory Panel, which will advise and direct to the new deputy director actions around mitigating for wildfire. AB 642 creates a cultural burn liaison position within CAL FIRE. And then it's going to facilitate the development of a prescribed fire, cultural fire or burn practitioner center, training center in the state of California. Senator Dodd has a couple of bills. One's going to establish the Office of Wildfire Technology Research and Development and creates an advisory panel around that. And it's really to try to take advantage of emerging technologies out there and then try to expedite the deployment of some of these technologies so that we can address fire sooner than later. The other bill, very important bill, one of the most important bills around fire this year is SB 332, which immunizes or protects burn bosses as well as the landowners who retain burn bosses from liability associated with fires that might go rogue, associated with prescribed fire activities on those properties. Great piece of legislation, long overdue. So then lastly, SB 456. So what this bill in a nutshell is trying to do is say that the Wildfire and Forest Resiliency Task Force and those actions, particularly those actions that have been taken, should not be static. We need to form this task force. This task force needs to regularly meet. We need to be nimble. We need to continue to propose new actions to address wildfire in the state. And we need to do it on a regular basis. So it's calling for, the regular updating of those actions to increase pace and scale of wildfire resiliency and forest health, veggie management type projects in the state of California. Then some odds and ends on climate. There were a better part of 20 bills that were introduced the earlier part of session around climate resiliency. And surprisingly, a lot of those didn't see the light of day, and I'm still trying to understand why that is. And the only thing that I can conclude is that I think the administration wants to occupy a lot of the climate space and sort of try to drive a lot of policy through the administration itself. But one item that did manage to squeak through, and why I bring this up, and that is, it goes, it's consistent with Secretary Crowfoot's Cutting the Green Tape program, and that is they're trying to streamline coastal adaptation project permitting. So nature-based solutions for coastal adaptations, those sorts of projects wouldn't need to withstand the same level of rigor, environmental rigor, reporting that other types of projects would have to endure. And again, why I bring this up is that we were one of the listed supporters, and surprisingly, we received a phone call the day it was signed, asking for a quote from our general manager. So the author's office did list, we had a nice quote that I know Sabrina, working with Eric, forwarded, was included in their press release. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. We're getting kudos from folks down in Orange County. And then on recycling, a couple of bills that we took positions on, Ms. Comliger's bill, AB 962, puts reusable and washable containers, so glass bottles would now be part of the bottle bill program. So typically, you take your bottles to a place, they're picked up, they're crushed, they're recycled. In this case, you would take them to an authorized washer, and they would still qualify for the redemption fees. But instead of going through the extra processes, those bottles would be washed, sanitized, and then put back into the system. And I think, it's a concept that's probably long overdue. And I think the technology is finally there, and it's been approved through Cal Recycle. So it's a good piece of legislation. I'm glad we supported that.
Back to the future.
Yeah.
Back to
Exactly.
milk bottles. that you
Right.
use.
I know, isn't that funny? The old milk bottles, is that what you said, Ann?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And then Carrillo bill, so this is for single-use utensils and condiments. It's similar to the straw bill from a couple years ago. A patron needs to ask for them, not just to automatically receive these items. And then these items no longer can be bundled. I don't know if sometimes if you're getting your DoorDash food, you're getting everything bundled in a plastic sleeve or cylinder. That can't be the case anymore in California. They want to break that up. So, and I know that we took an interest in this because high level of use at our parks during COVID led to increased trash pickup and illegal or unlawful disposal of trash. So trying to arrest that the best we can. And we're hoping that, through bills and actions like this, that we can help to mitigate that going forward. Good policy. Couple of miscellaneous bills. Assemblymember Grayson's Green Empowerment Zone bill. If you're familiar with the enterprise zones, I think this would operate in very much the same fashion. What they're envisioning in this bill is trying to find a way to help what they're terming a just transition for employment type out there, which is, there's a lot of petroleum fossil fuel employees out there. And as we transition from that, the use of fossil fuels, I think that this is a very foresightful piece of legislation in that they're going to be trying to find a way to invest in other economies and green economies in particular. And this bill is, I believe it's specific to East Contra Costa County. But good concept, and governor thought so too, and that was signed. Northern waterfront of Contra Costa County. And then lastly, we had a resolution that proclaimed July as California Park and Rec Month, Professionals Month. And it was a nice piece of legislation, co-sponsored by CRPD and CPRS, that really talked more about the role and activities that park and rec professionals at all levels played during COVID, that they were really all hands on deck. And where a lot of departments and activities in a lot of other areas weren't as active during COVID, those folks had to step up and really take on additional responsibilities during COVID. So well done by the senator, and very much appreciated the activity around this from CPRS and CRPD for the park professional. Questions?
I see D.
Great report. And I was just curious, what is happening with RM3?
Who was I talking? Was I talking to Eric? Who was I talking to? Somebody asked me that question maybe yesterday, day before. So there was initially there was 20 million in the budget 2 years ago. It got revised to $5 million. And they're on the precipice of acquiring the land, and then literally just in advance of signing some sort of settlement agreement or purchase agreement, a private entity came in and purchased it at fair market. I'm of the understanding that purchase went south, and that the market's going, or that the property is going to be remarketed.
Huh.
What does that mean? What happened to the money, the $5 million? I don't know. It probably reverted to the budget and used for things like Carnegie, perhaps. But I mean, Eric, maybe you probably have a better understanding what the current situation is.
Yeah, it's actually somewhat ironic, President Rosario. We had a tour of N3 at a staff level, and our guide wasn't really trying to sell us on it. And then the very next day, we read that a private bidder had submitted a proposal that they were the family was planning to accept. So I think it's being sold to a private entity. If that goes south, then we still have the coalition that's available to re-engage. But at this point, I think it's going through the private process.
Fascinating. You wonder why a private bidder would want the land. It's totally undevelopable.
I thought I heard it was foreign money, so they may just be buying it sight unseen. I don't know.
Isn't life fascinating these days with all this money floating around the world?
Yeah. And last question is, what's happening with the bridge toll money?
Speaking of money,
I think that's still an illegal process. They're collecting the money and holding it, but let's double check on that. But I think it's still tied up in the legal process.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
okay.
And, related to that, President Rosario, I heard something recently about a possible mega transportation measure in 2024. So we should figure out both of those pieces moving forward.
Yeah, because that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
How much is a lot of money on a typical year?
Well, I think regional measure 3, I probably will misquote the figure, but I thought it was like in the billions.
Yeah.
Well, that is, I would call an appreciable fund. Yes. Okay. All right. Any
Thank
other questions on the legislation?
Yes.
Director Wasby.
Yeah, thank you for the great report, and thank you for all the great work. I've never ceased to be amazed by how we do so well in advocating and getting grants and things like that. I just got an email today from CARPED, California Association of Recreation Park District, reminding all of its members, it was to every member, all 83 member groups, I think, and suggesting, hey, today's the last day to apply for this. And, obviously that's a little late. We've been asking people to apply for it for months, but I always am pleased and just happy as heck that the East Bay Regional Park is always pretty much there first and with the best projects and things like that. So I think we're very worthy of these grants and things like that. And I want you to know that Carped, which I'm very familiar with, just admires the heck out of us and wants to hitch their wagon to us any way they can. And so I'm really happy that occurred. A couple of things. On the burn boss legislation, I'm very, very happy about that. I think that could be a big, big benefit to the district. I'm wondering if anybody, and I'm looking at this screen, I don't know that anybody would know here, but do we have any certified burn bosses in the Park District?
Would somebody tell me exactly who is classified as a burn boss?
Oh, go ahead if you're, I mean, I was going to say, in the old days, you would backfiring and doing prescribed burning was a real big tool in our toolbox to eliminate the fire burning again. Once you burn it off in spring, it's not going to come back. So if you burn along fence lines and neighborhoods, that was a great, quote, fuel break. It was always obviously very visual. You saw you had protection. Neighbors said, "Oh, thank you. You burned off this area. It's not going to burn again until next year potentially." And so burn bosses were, well, I don't know, the burn boss was you walked around with somebody higher grade than you and told you how to use a drip torch and said, don't burn down any darn houses. And that worked for a few years. And obviously now it's not. And so you go through lots and lots of certifications in order to be the person in charge. And I guess that's why the legislation occurred. No one was burning anymore because for some reason, insurance companies were suggesting that the quote burn boss, who was probably just some fire captain, was in fact liable for anything that went haywire.
It strikes me as kind of an old-fashioned term that maybe you better start classifying it as something that sounds like it's well organized and safe.
Well, to address the first question and give a little bit of background on our team's well-organized and safe approach, our fire chief is working to bring on a burn boss consultant or future name thereof. And her team is working with our stewardship team to identify locations that do not have endangered species that are safe to conduct a prescribed burn, and then conditions will therefore be monitored going forward, but early stages. And then also we'll be working with Doug's office to do an assessment of the various legislation that passed around prescribed burns to make sure that we are providing our stewardship and fire team with all the most updated legislative and policy around doing a prescribed burn.
I think it makes sense to have appropriate spots, but you need to know that it's been well thought out before you get there. Burn boss just sounds casual. And I think for a lot of people, it's scary. So if we can come up with a title that makes sense and it implies that we have done a real careful process and know what we're doing, that would be really helpful. So it sounds like, as usual, the team is on the ball working on that. But Dennis has seen it in the past, so he knows it works too. So that's good to know. Yeah.
And then finally, if I could, so I thank Senator McGuire for proclaiming 2021, Parks and Recreation Professionals Proclamation. Why don't these guys do that a year in advance so we can celebrate the darn thing? Am I missing something?
No, in fact, Dennis, I think, so I've run a similar resolution through the process, at least on 5 separate occasions, predating this one, and started it in January, started the process in January, February, and two a year when I worked on these, they didn't take effect until August, the month after. That's when they finally made their way through the legislature. So,
oh my goodness.
Anyway.
I would just think that in anticipation of an election year next year, when all of our local assembly members are running, to have this special occasion or this special month set aside and then invite them to the parks for a photo op and for us to, make happy with these folks and make them happy because they have the opportunity to be in a park in a great setting and help themselves. I think it'd be a great opportunity.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, organization, hopefully it can be worked faster than it has been before. Any other questions?
Director Wieskamp, just wanted to mention a couple things. One is just really acknowledging our fire chief, Tylee, her support in trying to, in securing the $10 million for tree mortality and the $3.5 million for the equipment was invaluable. She's extremely busy, valuable member of our staff, and she really took the time out of her day to participate in all the meetings that Lisa and I and Doug participated on with the various staff members up in Sacramento. I think they were probably getting tired of seeing us, but I think the hard work also sometimes pays off. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And also with that, maybe just to have Lisa comment a little bit about our process for next year, because she's done a lot of work already on thinking about next year and just where we are in the process, and we'll keep you posted as we move it forward, but just that we've initiated some discussions.
She always proves that we're ahead of the game. So go for it, Lisa.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm Lisa Bollinger, Legislative and Policy Management Analyst. In preparation for next year, not only is the Government Affairs team thinking about our Sacramento and DC trips and what those might look like in a bit of a hybrid world, but we also are preparing some funding requests for both the state and the federal delegation. So for these funding requests, just to kind of set expectations, in terms of what we're bringing forward, we're ensuring that any project or program that we're bringing forward is within one of our colleagues' work plans. Where we are in the stage right now is that we're sitting down with each team, well, virtually, our stewardship team, our design and construction, our maintenance and skilled trades, management services, and we're vetting the various projects. And we're looking for something that could be a large infrastructure or a large environmental restoration that pairs with the interest of the elected official whose district it would be in, who we're making the ask of, and would also have a benefit of the community and nexus to the Park District's mission. And so we hope to have some formalized asks maybe next week or the following that we can start sharing with the board. And in terms of how we'll begin the asks with the offices is we'll start with some staff level meetings to share the ideas around the projects and speak details. And then we hope to have the asks already and packaged for our Sacramento and DC visits so the board can discuss it as part of our meetings.
I can already see you're developing a roadmap for all of us. So that's very good. I think that's what you just heard about all this legislation we did, and that we know you've worked very hard and to stay ahead of the game and also to encourage other entities throughout the state to be involved. So we all thank you very much for what you're doing for the district. Doug Wheat, you just stay there. You never leave, do you?
I'm just pointing to D.
Yeah, I just remember one last thing as Lisa reminded me, but I don't know if we've made a recommendation for the Ted Radke Award, and I was hoping to. Really think we should think about nominating Rebecca Can. I think she's really come through for the Park District, especially in these times. So, if you have any thoughts to that, that's my nomination.
Appreciate the comment. D, and we have been having conversations, and we actually have a challenge this year because we have at least 3 members that are worthy, and we actually have some staff people that would have been worthy. But maybe we can talk with you offline about it, because we have Senator Skinner and Senator Wachowski were also very supportive of the funding for the tree mortality issue. So we have a good crew to choose from.
Yeah, excellent.
But we are considering and working on that. That was something we just started talking to the foundation about.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Great.
I wanted to mention, just to build off of Lisa's good summary, it's important to note that in those requests, sometimes a state agency support for a project, a letter of support is needed. And sometimes it's easy to come by, other times it's not easy to come by. It may be projects that's popular or needed from the park district perspective, but the state isn't aware of that project yet. So at least on the federal side, sometimes there's more paperwork and letters of stated support that are needed to complete such a request. That's all.
Okay. One more thing to keep track of. All right, are we ready for federal? I'm not sure the federals are ready for it.
Actually not quite.
Not quite, okay.
I wanted to actually ask Lisa to give a report on tree and vegetation mortality. Doug did touch on it, but I just give the board a little bit of an update of our current activity because we have been doing a lot of work to try to make sure we can spend the money in time.
Okay, Lisa.
All right, so on the tree mortality issue, it's in the staff packet, but just to share verbally with the board, former Assistant Fire Chief Bradford Gallup is consulting on the issue. He's providing just a wealth of knowledge and strategy to the approach. His approach to the project is seeing this incident within an incident of the tree mortality issue as a pilot project of addressing vegetation management within a changing climate. How we've been approaching the issue is we have created an initial budget for the $10 million. It's in the packet as well, but our granting agency for that $10 million will be Cal Recycle. So we're in early conversations, and thank you to acting grants manager David Cowboy for your leadership on helping to secure those funding so we can start spending it. The window to spend is about 2 years, so we really need to be able to hit the ground running. Luckily, we have had just a great team moving this forward. I'd also like to thank Acting Assistant Fire Chief Kent Simpson, Patrick, Rose, and others from the fire department who are all working to pull together a request for proposal for a consultant to help overall manage that $10 million in the work that needs to be done. Something that may be of interest to the board is an approach that we're taking because Cal Recycle is a waste management entity. Something that's of great interest to them is what are we going to do with the debris as the trees are removed. So it's really a wonderful perspective on the issue and really encouraging for us to think about sort of that overall green picture. In the words of Acting Assistant Chief Simpson, it's really an opportunity to embrace making sure that we're mitigating against more carbon release while we're moving these trees. We don't want to add to the problem while we're addressing the problem. And so for that reason, we're exploring the opportunity of bringing a carbonator into the East Bay to help manage the vegetation, put the vegetation into the carbonator. It would then be processed and become a high nutrient dense biochar that could be returned to the site, be used for possible lead mitigation and other benefits across the district. We are also exploring conversations with the California State Coastal Conservancy for a potential complementary grant that could also go towards a carbonator for the tree mortality issue. Additionally, a quick update on that $3.5 million for fire response equipment. We understand that our granting agency will be Cal OES. Unfortunately, we are playing a bit of phone tag with them as they are responding to fires in real time. And so we do hope to connect with them soon when they're safe and ready to get that funding secured. I want to give a thank you to our legislative assistant, Flora, who has been leading and organizing a variety of events. Recently, we had a site visit with Supervisor Miley's office at Reinhardt Redwood Regional Park with the staff to just have a discussion about our approach to the tree mortality issue. And upcoming, I believe in 2 weeks, we'll be having a press media event with Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Cahan on the $3.5 million, the Park District's overall vegetation management, ecologically sensitive approach, as well as our wildfire response and our public safety unit. And then just while speaking on the issue of tree mortality, I wanted to take the time to highlight that this Sunday will be the 30th anniversary and commemoration of the Oakland Hills fire. And I understand President Rosario, you will be speaking, and Director Waspy will also be attending. And thank you both for your efforts responding to that fire when it occurred. And just if there's anything to say on that, I thought we should bring it up as well.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions? Okay. Eric, are we ready to move on?
One final state issue that we just want to acknowledge, and then we can move on to federal, is the nuisance abatement legislation was a real team effort as well. We had very strong support from our entire legal department, but Jason Rosenberg really was the incentive or the catalyst to move forward. And then the partnership with MidPenn, their legislative team, their legal team, their advocate, was just a really great effort. And I believe this was the first standalone bill that we've passed since I've been here that was directly a benefit to the district and will save us a significant amount of money. We've raised a lot of money in government affairs over the years, but this is one where we'll actually be able to save some money because we won't have to go through the strenuous legal process. So we're really grateful to see that through. And I know it was a project that Carol Victor wanted to see years ago move forward, and really Jason brought it to us to a new level. And so really thankful and happy to see that go through. It sounds like a small thing, but it's actually a pretty good, significant cost savings.
Small things take a long time. Dee?
Yeah, if possible, I'd like to see from Jason or Carol or exactly how we're going to use that, how that bill is going to benefit the Park District.
Yeah.
So it'd be great.
Makes sense. I think that sounds reasonable and help. Also, if anybody come in can look at it and understand what it's there for, that it makes sense for us. It's not only good to get money, but it's good to spend it wisely. And this would not have been a way to do it. Okay, then I think we are ready to move forward to federal legislation. Welcome.
Okay. I'll take the first stab, and then we can get Peter's insights. But this first, you'll see that you've seen over the year that we've discussed a lot of Conservation Corps legislation. There's a lot of momentum behind that concept. There's different versions of what that means to folks. Some folks are looking at it to help benefit rural communities. Some folks are looking at it to help where COVID was particularly impactful. There's the more traditional approach, and just in terms of Conservation Corps that goes out and works in parks and other entities. And then there's a concept of Climate Corps. So we're bringing these forward, but just know that there's overall, it's kind of like these are startup bills, and overall at the end of the day, there'll be something potentially in a larger bill that will incorporate some of these components. So for the first bill, it's really focused on environmental justice and air quality, transportation, and safe housing, green space. So it looks to address widespread unemployment, both in the urban areas, and actually there's a component in here for farmers and ag lands. So again, another piece in this space that I think is worth supporting, just knowing that the CCC Act may get folded into a broader bill later on. Peter, anything in addition on this particular bill?
The bill was introduced in July. If you've seen the description of the memorandum, it talks about the AmeriCorps agency being the administrator of such a program. I wouldn't be concerned about that because AmeriCorps has had success and does memorandums of agreement with various agencies that the Park District may or may not have worked with. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I wouldn't be too concerned about that. It's a very detailed bill. It does not have a lot of co-sponsors. It doesn't have any co-sponsors at the moment, which usually means it has some momentum and some growing support behind it. But as Eric very aptly noted, there's been at least 5 or 6 other bills introduced on this topic. This is another important bill to bring attention to it, and hopefully it'll be part of some of the broader reconciliation legislation that's being negotiated right now in Congress. I'll stop there.
Any questions on that bill?
So just for clarification, so these bills are outside of what's being proposed, outside of the reconciliation and infrastructure bill now?
It's very similar to what is being discussed. It's just how they ultimately decide to put it together, Director Rosario. They all are fairly similar. It's just where they put the emphasis. Is it through AmeriCorps or is it directly to an agency? Is it more urban oriented or is it more rural oriented? It just depends on the senator or representative and where they, what they've heard from their own communities and stakeholders, and trying to put an emphasis there. And hope that answers your question.
Okay, great, thank you. Then it looks like Dennis has a question.
Okay,
Oh, Dave, I'm good.
did you have a question?
No,
Roski?
thank you.
Okay.
No.
The next bill is Peter Apley stated where members put their legislative backing behind or things that benefit their states, obviously, or districts. This is one such bill that really is focused on a lot of federal lands and also areas that counties that have federal land in them that they are helping to provide wildfire prevention and mitigation resources would get some funding from this legislation. And there's a fair number of those actually in Oregon. Then it also provides funding for the reduction projects and county projects so that there's a land and reauthorizes the collaborative forest landscape restoration projects. So the bill is not a direct impact on the park district because we really don't have federal lands that we work on in terms of fire mitigation, but it is supported by both of our senators. And it is part of a broader conversation on fire prevention and mitigation that's gained a lot of momentum in the last 10 years. So we're recommending a support primarily to support our two senators in this effort. Peter, anything else you'd want to add?
This bill is going to be the subject of a legislative hearing along with a couple of other wildfire bills next week. On October 21st, this bill by Senator Merkley will be part of that hearing, as well as a bill that the Park District has come to state support for, which is the Western Wildfire Support Act, which is recently introduced by Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada. And also another Senator Feinstein bill, the Wildfire Emergency Act, will also be part of that hearing next week. So that wildfire continues to be top of mind in the Congress, and these bills will have hearings. Doesn't mean they will be marked up, meaning they will pass out of committee and move to the Senate floor next week. They're not on that track, but this is the first step in a three-step process. So it is a positive sign, though, that they're having hearings on these bills at this time with the hope that they could pass in this legislative session, which would carry over into next year.
Any questions? Okay, we'll move on to the next, another Merkley bill. This one actually would benefit the district. It provides funding for PPEs and other filtration measures and actually warning systems for wildfire smoke, which has a direct impact on our not only our communities, but our staff, our employees in the field. So this is one that I think is really worth our support because it does provide that additional layer of assistance when we have those smoke-filled skies and our employees are out out in the open air. So really strongly suggest a support position on this legislation. Again, both of our senators are supporting it. We've also added, as you can read at the bottom of the screen here, we've also added a provision in these bills that sometimes companion legislation gets introduced in the other legislative body, and it's exactly the same language. That's how Congress works. So if we take a support position on this bill and later a bill gets introduced in the House, that's the exact same language, we'd like the committee's agreement that we would de facto support the House bill as well, because that will reduce the amount of bills that we have to have in consideration in this committee, and then also on the broader board agenda for the full board meetings. So anyway, with that, we would recommend a strong support. I don't know if there's any additional information from you, Peter, on this, and before we go to questions.
Nothing more.
Okay.
Any questions on?
Questions?
Okay. Next bill is another direct benefit to the district. The Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Bill would extend that program. We've actually benefited directly. We received some funding for, I believe, the Tidewater facility or the Tidewater space. It used to be the Fluxy Van site at MLK Shoreline. And this is very much funding directed at urban and more underserved communities. But so therefore why Tidewater was a good candidate. But we strongly support extending this program, and it does not compete, even though it goes hand in hand with the Land and Water Conservation Fund because it's funded through the same proceeds from offshore oil leasing. There's enough money in that account to fund both this program and Land and Water permanently. So strongly recommend the support on these bills as well. Not hearing additional comments from Peter, so we can move on. Again, another Conservation Corps bill. Marcy Kaptur has been in Congress for quite a while, and she's introduced something that's more of a historical version of the Conservation Corps that really is doing trail projects and stream restoration and park construction, everything you see there. And she has this year incorporated a focus on climate and resiliency projects, restoration projects. So again, another component of the whole core package that I think is worth supporting as part, knowing that it'll be potentially part of a broader bill later on.
She has introduced some version of this bill since 2008. So she's probably one of the most engaged members when it comes to this, trying to balance urban and rural projects and needs, but also seeing that the Department of Energy could also be an agency involved in this kind of work. And so she's emphasized the Department of Energy is also a participant in her bill. She has wanted to have the money go straight to agencies rather than to go to AmeriCorps. So it's just a difference from what we were talking about earlier, but again, constructive with bold goals of wanting to grow the enrollment of the program pretty significantly. So she'll remain at the table in these negotiations for sure.
No questions. We'll go on to the last bill to consider. And this is of particular significance to the Park District and our partners at the National Park Service. Representative DeSaulnay, we are working with his office on funding for the Visitor Center, which will be the next and last presentation of the meeting. But this particular resolution would recognize the need to exonerate Port Chicago 50, who did not go back to work after the explosion and were dishonorably discharged in an act of, frankly, an act of standing up for safety and their workplace conditions. So exoneration is something that's Representative DeSaulnay and Representative Barbara Lee and others have been working on for quite some time. This year, I believe this has gotten farther than I think it has historically. It's included in the Defense Authorization Bill. That bill is a mandatory must-pass piece of legislation, and it passed pretty overwhelmingly earlier this year. And so the Senate will be acting on it, and we can have Peter report on that action. So I feel that it's moved farther than it has in the past. The other option for exoneration is through the U.S. Navy. The Secretary can exonerate the Port Chicago 50 by administrative action. And we have a new secretary who was sworn in August. And my understanding is that I think it was maybe Representative Lee, but between Representative Lee and Representative DeSaulnay, they have made a request for the Navy Secretary to consider exoneration of the Port Chicago 50. So both efforts moving forward seems to have some good possibility of happening. But I'll let Peter. Maybe there's more to the story than I'm reading, but I'll let Peter talk a little bit more about this process.
The Senate is expected to take up the defense reauthorization bill in the next month or so. As Eric noted, it is passed successfully 60 years in a row. And so it's an important bill that outlines the policies and spending out of the Department of Defense. So hopefully it stays in there. This is not the kind of provision that would be removed as part of a conference or by the Senate. But we'll continue to monitor it. But it's had success last month and passage in the House, and there will be time soon in the next month here for the Senate to take up the overall bill. I'll stop there.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Oh,
Eric?
if no further questions on that, we could move to the next and I believe last item. So just to introduce the item, I want to acknowledge our colleague Yuli Padmore and all of her work on helping to build support for a possible visitor center at Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, in cooperation with the National Park Service. Yuli's been doing just tremendous work in terms of both organizing with the Black Employees Collective and other external entities to bring attention to the historic nature of what happened at the site, and also to make sure that we have the funding to effectively tell that history through a visitor center experience and in partnership with the National Park Service. So thank you for that, Yuli, and all the other members of staff that are on that have participated. I also wanted to just say that the representative has made an effort to request $10 million in the budget. We can talk a little bit more about that when the presentation's over. But I think that request will continue for next year. So all the letters and work that has gone into it, we will be able to leverage again next year for that consideration as the National Park Service and potentially the Defense Department through the Navy consider their budgets and budget allocations. So with that, I'd like to introduce Flora for a presentation about the advocacy work, and then perhaps Yuli may want to say a few words after the presentation about the work, because I know she's been very much involved, and then we can talk a little bit more with Peter about.
I just mentioned
budget.
I was going to touch on infrastructure and reconciliation. I'll wait until they're both done and just briefly cover that at the end.
I'm sorry, Peter. Yeah, I forgot about that. I'm sorry.
Oh,
yes.
Go ahead. You've introduced them. That's fine. I'll wait.
Yep. Apologies. So Flora, if you
Thank
wanna-
you, Eric. Flora Chontosh, Legislative Assistant, and Yuli and Peter, you are both also certainly welcome to jump in if you have, when you have something to add on this topic. I just really want briefly to discuss some of the advocacy efforts as we work to secure the $10 million in next year's federal budget, as Eric mentioned. I would like to screen share, so bear with me, to show the letters of support that we have already collected. I think this is visible. Yes, can we see the list, hopefully?
We can see the list.
Fabulous, thank you kindly.
You may just want to scroll down a little bit because it cuts off at 17, or maybe you're going to scroll through the whole thing. I don't know.
Eric is ruining my big reveal. Yes, I will. I can certainly scroll as folks are skimming this list. So in the top half, we have the organizations who have submitted letters of support. We started this effort in August. It was a team effort in government affairs, contacting these organizations. The letter itself is addressed to Vice President Kamala Harris. She was determined to be the most strategic recipient of the letter, and the two copied recipients. Well, it's both of our U.S. senators, Congressman DeSaulnier and Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland. And to date, we've collected 41. A big shout out to Yuli, who did tremendous outreach. And we continue to solicit more in the coming months. This is a multi-month effort, and the more letters, the better. The park and the historic story of the visitor center that these in combination will tell will require a whole lot of collaboration as we move forward. So we're not stopping here with stakeholder engagement. And it's a very much unifying location, and the story that it tells, the gathering place to remind us to work toward justice, and that all of these folks have put their support behind this effort. And then in the bottom half here are elected officials, individuals, folks who personally wanted to share their support, residents, and a big thank you to the Black Employee Collective, who helped in the naming process, held the process accountable and provided feedback, and worked with our team on the letter of support and the editing, the wording that we wanted to specifically use. And moving forward, government affairs continues to coordinate with the National Park Service to discuss next steps on co-management. There are regular meetings happening, and the Park District Interpretation and Rec team is continuing to tell the story via videos, online engagement. So there's a lot happening around advocacy efforts. And before we take questions, I would love to give the floor to Yuli.
Yeah, thanks, Flora. Just super excited to work with obviously such an awesome team. Flora is fairly new to government affairs and has been doing just such terrific work and really doing a deep dive. And obviously my colleagues, Eric and Lisa, and all the work that we're doing there. I just want to thank everyone that's on this list. So important to share how everyone in the community of the Bay Area feels. Very supportive. And this group is really diverse too. It's a reflection of what we think, what the themes of this park will be, a diverse theme. So I think it reflects everyone. I am really grateful for the continued work that Brian Holt, Devin Reef, Eddie Willis are doing in planning such a terrific job, and obviously under the leadership of Christina Kelchner, Interp and Rec, Kevin Damstra, Ira Bletz, and Ann Kassabaum and all of their work, and obviously the people that operate that park, just so much terrific work that's happening. And obviously, I don't want to go without really expressing my gratitude and extreme grateful, just thanks to the board for moving forward with this. And you know, within the community, there continues to be goodwill for the park district following the decision of the name Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50. On the day the park was named, the board made a request for the community to answer the call. And as you can see, the incredible written support for the visitor center funding. The community has ongoing support for education and funding at the future park. And we do stand ready, like it says in the letter, to continue that support. And I will continue to advocate for this, and also really just grateful to UC Berkeley's Future History Lab, all these great community organizations that are, and Together Bay Area, continuing this conversation. And I just think it's a reflection of the great work of not just the East Bay Regional Park District, but the Bay Area as a whole. So really proud. And thank you so much. Thank you, Flora.
Board members?
I would be remiss if I did not thank the Black Employee Collective. I'm sorry, I had to hop in. Thank them, thank ASME, and then also the Asian Employee Collective as well, and the women's group. And so anyway, I just want to add all of that as well. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge those folks. And Yolanda Burial Knight, Sabrina Pinnell, the co-founders of the Black Employee Collective. So thanks.
I'm sure all of them, one and all, feel properly thanked, Yuli. Good job.
It's a very impressive list, and the body of work that went into that to get that support was very, very impressive. And everywhere I go, when I mention Thurgood Marshall, people are just so positive about it, and I really see good things coming out of this, and I can't wait till we get ourselves a visitor center and open this park.
I think it's one of the probably more important educational tools.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you, I never heard a word about it in the state of Texas. It wasn't on anybody's plate. And I think it very much is now. And I think if we approach it all in a very positive manner about what happened and what should have happened after and all the rest of it, I think it's going to be helpful for the whole community. And so I think it's well worth taking the effort and gathering and reminding everybody that we're all working on it together. A word about it in the state of Texas. Yeah, it wasn't on anybody's plate.
Sorry, Kelly A. Mute yourself. Director Waspy, or I'll mute. Director Waspy, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you for all your tremendous efforts and everybody's tremendous efforts. I think this is going to be a great, wonderful, wonderful project. And I can't help but believe this will be the easiest time to raise $10 million. Well, it's a no-brainer to me, but I think it will be very successful. And I don't know if I share Director Rosario's, I hope it can be soon. I hope it's sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I've been watching this for a while, and the board members have been supportive of the exoneration for a really long time. And Peter Umhofer's work, I'm just like, I haven't said anything about that really, but he does such incredible work for the Park District, and it dates back. So I just want to acknowledge that as well.
You're very kind, Yuli. This is a tricky one. I've been honest with you guys because it's an education process, and I think these letters are tremendously helpful. But I've got to redouble my efforts. But I'm climbing up a wall, and so we're going to need to collectively come back and think about other ways to bring attention to this beyond some of the people we've been communicating with and stretch beyond just our immediate delegation. So it's going to take some work, but I think we'll get there.
I'm sure we all appreciate your efforts, and if you have suggestions for us at the district, I'm sure we will do all we can and talking to others. I just think it's positive. That's what we're trying to do, nothing negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thank you, Yuli, for acknowledging Peter. He has been a great asset in this, and I know it is a challenging process to work through. And I just want to recognize that significance. And I agree that it's history that needs to be shared, frankly, internationally. And I would never have learned about it growing up. I did know about it because I worked directly next to George Miller's office, and his office was when I was in Washington, D.C., and his office was the leader in the effort to make the memorial an actual unit of the National Park Service. But without that background and knowledge of his interest in both the justice issues and workplace safety issues in the labor component of it, without that knowledge, I wouldn't have been aware. So this is a super important effort to try to get it on the national scale through the Park Service. And as Yuli has said in the past, a destination for folks to come learn more about U.S. history from the East Coast to come to the West Coast or anywhere else in the country. So,
do we have a list of the individual sailors and which states they came from, which communities? It strikes me as we should reach out to each of those sailors, communities, and states and say, please help us do this. Again, positive action, trying to write something and make it a positive now. And they deserve that. So whatever we can do to find that list and work with them, let's try to do that.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge Kevin Damstra and Brian Holt. I mean, after every meeting I've seen Brian show the 50, the name of the 50. And it just, to this day, it makes me pause and a little emotional every time I see that. So I do know that they work very closely with National Park Service as well. And I think they're actively approaching that and dealing with that. So,
well, I think we're on the same team. May it happen soon. So keep it in high gear, Yuli. I trust you. I know that. Okay. And
next we have Peter's infrastructure. So I'm happy to pop that on the screen for his presentation. Just one moment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I just want to run through some key dates. As the House and Senate resume their work this coming week, the National Park Service Director will be testifying, the nominee, Charles Sams. The Park District has issued a letter of support for his nomination, and he comes to the job with having worked with the Trust for Public Land and worked with a variety of Confederation of Tribes in Oregon and the Northwest states. And people are very, I don't know him, but others do. And folks that I've spoken with are very excited to hopefully have him confirmed soon. So just wanted to mention that since they've been a key partner with the Park District for several years. The UN Climate Convention, also known as Conference of the Parties 26 in Glasgow, Scotland, will be held October 31st through November 12th. You'll probably see more news in the coming days on that as the president is planning to attend some of those meetings on October 31st and November 1st. A very big delegation of the Biden administration will be attending those meetings. There was much anticipation and hope that there would be some legislation, the infrastructure bill at least would pass so the president could talk about that, but we'll talk about that in a bit. It won't be on that time frame. The October 31st is the current deadline when the short-term extension of the transportation bill expires. And December 3rd is when the current funding for the federal government would expire, as well as the debt limit. So the big dates I think to watch are somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas. There will be some agreements reached on funding the government for the rest of the fiscal year, addressing the debt limit issue, having the House pass the infrastructure bill, and then decisions will have to be made on what amount is going to be the reconciliation bill. We go to the next slide and just talk briefly. The infrastructure bill focuses on $550 billion in new spending. But if you look at both the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill, you will notice that many of these California bills that we were talking about earlier, Doug did a great job summarizing an amazing amount of activity this legislative session. Many of these California bills and those goals and those policies are starting to be reflected in this federal legislation. Not the least of which is the $7 billion for the Transportation Alternatives Program, $1 billion for the Active Transportation Program. 50 million is not a lot of money, but that's targeted for vegetation management. Pretty significant increase. This would be over a 5-year period, 7.5 for the RAISE program. So we keep it at 1.5 annually. So that's just a snapshot of programs that are probably most interest to the Park District. As you know, the infrastructure bill touches on rail, transit, broadband, power grid. We'll go to the next slide. Also, some other provisions that will benefit the Park District is $1.4 billion in resiliency grants to states and localities. It's pretty broadly worded. Details will matter. The guidance and rulemaking will matter, and exactly what kind of projects would be eligible. There is $1 billion for the BRIC grant program, which is pre-disaster mitigation program. And that's a significant boost. Also, $500 million for a USDA Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program. As you know, as I noted in there, there's a cost share and a $10 million limit, but that's just one of many new wildfire approaches that the Congress is thinking about with that. I don't expect this infrastructure bill to change unless negotiations really take a different turn. This is pretty well set. There's also $24 million in there for the EPA Bay Restoration Program. So again, the bill also includes significant funding for clean buses, electric vehicles, and a lot of other programs. Anyone have any questions on infrastructure?
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's
let's
a
hope
lot.
Let's hope it stays.
We'll go to the next slide just to briefly mention the House Transportation Bill is really wish it was more in the mix in the current discussions, because it has some really good programs that directly benefit special districts. Still, these programs could be folded into the reconciliation bill, but it's not looking like that at the moment. So the bicycle pedestrian grant program over 4 years would really be a significant boost. That program, as I noted before, short-term extension expires at the end of the month. So they'll have to do another short-term extension until they can get agreement. But that's where that stands. All right, I'm getting over a cold and I apologize. The reconciliation bill has been in the news the most. There has been a top line number of, it's been referenced many times, 3.5 trillion. It will be lower than that. Just to give you an understanding of the universe of what the bill covers, I've listed those out in various bullet points there. Pre-K community college, child tax credit, Pell Grant, paid family medical leave, clean energy production program, funding for drought, funding for wildfire, housing assistance programs, a civilian conservation corps program, potentially addressing prescription drug prices through Medicare. It's fairly broad. It's often referred to as a human infrastructure bill. Most experts believe, in sources and staff I've talked to, it ranges from 1.8 trillion to 2.3 trillion is what more likely the program will be funded at. The question is, do more things well or shorten the timeframes which these programs are funded? Currently, the programs are funded for 10 years. Most people want to see see all of these programs funded, but maybe for a shorter period of time of 3 to 5 years. Where I've heard there's most consensus is around the child tax credit, universal pre-K, and climate change. There's been talk about doing a reconciliation bill this year and doing one next year. I'm not sure that's possible, but or will be desirable, depending on how much money the reconciliation bill ultimately totals. Just to, if we could go to the slide on Civilian Conservation Corps, just to give you a flavor for what it entails in big numbers. The Senate bill has included $30 billion, most of the money going to the Interior Department and USDA. The House bill is funded at $10 billion, with money going to a variety of different agencies. The AmeriCorps, Interior, Agriculture, NOAA, and Labor Department. The real question is, the details matter. There's some concern with members about AmeriCorps having the bulk of the funding, and concerns from even some members in our delegation, hiring local versus out-of-state volunteers doing that work, and how important it is to have local volunteers that are in the community. So it's just to be worked out. I've been in close contact with the Corps network. They have been very engaged in these negotiations. They have views and believe that AmeriCorps is as good as any federal agency of administering Civilian Conservation Corps programs, and their goal has been to make sure at least they're funded at $2 billion over 5 years, and to engage 250,000 new participants. may have seen that the Park District was featured in the Core Network's blog, which was took a little bit of work behind the scenes, but it was really nice for them to do that. Lastly, on the last slide that references wildfire funding. Within the reconciliation bill, there are 3 different pots of money that I wanted to just identify. Work closely with some of the key staff that are writing these provisions. Special districts would be eligible under a program of $9 billion for forest restoration and resilience projects to reduce wildfires in the wildland urban interface. Again, details and guidance to follow. Another program will be funded at $1 billion for community wildfire protection plans that also would provide some funding for certain kinds of firefighting equipment and training. And then also $250 million for recovery and rehabilitation of burned areas in the wildland urban interface. So again, special districts would be eligible for those 3 programs directly. There's also funding in the bill, $10 billion for hazardous fuels treatments in the wildland urban interface, another $4 billion to do the same kind of project work in Forest Service lands. And there's $500 million for vegetation management in federal, state, and local areas. So that just gives you a little bit of a flavor for what is currently being negotiated and being talked about, and be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions, comments, anyone? It's so much to get a handle on.
This was pretty simple. I thought Doug's presentation was overwhelming and so many things to track. So.
Oh, but you are giving much more money in there, and for a variety of style programs that are kind of nebulous at times to understand. I would think for the public it's difficult.
Yeah.
It may be even difficult for those who are serving there. Dee, did you have any comment or question?
My only comment is that regarding the ceiling debt is that how is it possible the Republicans would oppose raising the ceiling debt when it's we're paying for their debt that they accumulated over there from their administration? I don't get that.
That's the past, Dee. That's the past.
Yeah, but the ceiling debt is paying for their debt that they
We
accumulated.
know that.
It's like,
Don't ask me. I'm not a Republican. Okay. I think Director Watsby has a comment or a thought.
Well, just a comment, probably not a thought, but it's funny when I hear these giant numbers. It's just so great, and when I hear the reforestation numbers, I'm just overwhelmed. I recall not too long in the past when people used to literally sue us, the regional park district, and say you need to cut down every non-native tree, which is controversial in itself, but they're referring to eucalyptus, cut them all down and replace all of everything from Castro Valley all the way to Richmond on the urban interface with redwoods or native trees and native species. And I used to say, sure, right, yeah, and that and a couple million a year or a couple billion total to do it. It's outrageous to even think about, but this kind of makes me think about it again. I would love to see the Bay Area and redwood trees again. I don't suspect that we would get the lion's share of that, but boy, it sure is interesting. I can think about it now instead of just saying, no, we don't have that kind of money.
One way to look at these numbers that I just shared with you, cut them in half.
There you go. There's a
And
realist.
because of this, it's still a substantial amount of money, more than ever before.
Yes.
Keep our fingers crossed, and we'll keep supporting our senators and the delegation and their work behind the scenes. this, the process now has gone much more into the behind closed doors and a little less public, where you had all these committee markups and statements being made by the various committees. Now it's, they're trying to work to get 2 senators to be supportive of it, along with moderates and progressives coming together in the House. So there is some negotiating going on before microphones and through the press, but there's also negotiating happening behind closed doors. And so this is going to be a little bit of a weird time in October, November, where everyone knows it's imperative to get something done. It's just getting to yes is sometimes hard, especially when you're dealing with these big numbers.
Yeah, big numbers.
Well, and I would suggest, Peter, and I know Yuli has a vote we need to call for, but I would suggest, Peter, that the extending the debt limit to December probably means this whole process is going to get extended till December, and they'll be getting this done right before the holidays.
Well, my goodness, they're going to be meeting and meeting separately, equally, behind closed doors, in front, whatever. I just find it very curious that there's all this concern with creating jobs. And as far as I'm concerned, a number of people, and I certainly don't speak to that many, my mechanic, a restaurateur, several different people have told me how hard it is to get employees. Is that just unusual phenomena here in the Bay Area?
No,
Ag workers, everybody. Nobody
Yeah.
can get workers.
There is an extensive article in the Washington Post this week that showed what is going on in the economy across the board in all the different sectors, or at least in all the main sectors of the economy. There's something going on. It's a longer conversation, except to say that workers are taking the opportunity to reassess where they are and what the potentials are in other sectors of the economy right now. And it's a product of COVID. It's a product of the state of the economy, but I've never seen anything quite like it in my lifetime. And there's movement afoot, and even economists can't quite put their finger on it, Director Wieskamp. But there is.
My nephew is a mechanic who runs a shop. He has one excellent Hispanic employee that's been there for years. One man came on who was quite good, but he only lasted a month. Maybe he got something else. So he is now in the process of taking someone on who is young and is interested in training, and he's hoping that's going to work. That's an added effort on his part to get a good employee. And I just think it's happening everywhere, and I've never seen anything like it. It's like people don't know quite what to do. And maybe that's what you're saying.
Well, there's that, but workers feel empowered now, and that's okay
You're right.
too.
Yes, well, they've mentioned that with the strikes and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
For money. Yeah. Difficult time. Shall we sum that up as that?
Yeah.
Eric, anything else for the good of the order?
I think Yuli has something to raise.
Yes,
All right.
I think we need to just take a vote on the federal items to support.
Mhm.
So I think it's a good way to wrap up.
Okay, that sounds like a good way to finish us up. Who'd like to make the motion?
I'll move that we support the package of federal legislative
I'll
items.
second.
Director Wasby, and the second is
I'll second.
President Rosario. Any other discussion? If that, then we have a roll call vote, please.
Yes. President Rosario,
Aye.
Director Wasby,
Aye.
Chair Wieskamp,
Aye.
unanimous.
Thank you, everyone, for an attendance and for your promises of all you're going to do. It is a difficult time, but I think you are all all the workers are working hard. Director Rosario.
Yeah, I'd just like to make, well, before we go, a couple of comments. One was spurred by the talk of the exoneration of the Chicago 50. And that is something that Director Waspy and I are both interested in, is providing more benefits and access to the veterans, to our parks. And I don't know, I think National Parks has something, and I think we should be doing more for our veterans. I mean, yes, they're soldiers, yes, but we as a country, these folks, they don't get paid an hourly wage that's comparable to what we pay our firefighters and our police officers, and they're tasked with something that this country, our country, sends people out to do what they need to do, and for what they sacrifice and their family sacrifice, I think the Park District needs to step up and provide some better access through our parks, so that they can enjoy some benefits of their service. And then on another thought on just the recycling part is we really need to get on our own look into our own selves, and we really need to look hard at our use of plastic bags in the Park District. It really is. We use a lot of plastic, and yes, it's convenient, and but there's got to be some other alternatives, and we're contributing to the plastic stream, and as we all know, it's bad, and so yeah. So those are my two comments, and really thank you for all the tremendous work that this crew here, the legislative team, and Peter and Doug, and it's tremendous amount of effort, so many things, so many moving parts to keep track of, and to be able to condense it so that we can make a decision on it is just fabulous. And I congratulate you all on the tremendous job you're all doing. So thank you.
Okay. Director Wasby, any parting thoughts or words?
No, just that I concur with Director Rosario. We should really look into veterans and how we can help them and be of service to them also. And I look forward to the districts coming up with an environmentally preferred purchasing policy, which I hope we can do the right thing. And we have a long debate on that.
And encourage the public along with us, because that's going to be an important part of really trying to do things in a safe manner when they're visiting the parks. Changing habits is not easy, but it's worth trying to do. Remember in the past, I know the veterans at the facility in Livermore, our staff was actually taking them out to Del Val and so on, and other activities. And I think we need to try to do more activities both within and out, so that they feel that they're part of the community. I agree. Veterans benefits sound worthwhile. Anything else? Any other challenges?
Sorry. While
Sure.
we're on the topic of members of the public, I just want to, it looks like we may have a couple members of the public here on the line. So I
Absolutely.
just wanted to check and see if anybody has any public comments here.
Absolutely.
Kelly, is this Kelly Abreu?
Yes, it is.
Okay, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Well, first off, the weather report, I'm just reading the headline. California drought intensity breaks new records. Present event is now, and this is written by a climatologist, so the guy knows, these people know their business. Present event is now the singularly most severe drought in California's more than 100-year-long direct observational record of surpassing even the maximum intensity of the last drought, which ended in 2016. So there you go. Just what they promised with climate change. It's happening now. Onto the topic of this committee, which is legislative bodies that are dealing with climate change. By the way, half the legislation is talking about that. One of the requirements for legislative bodies is the deadline is redistricting, and redistricting comes with the deadline. And you know, we were hearing from the staff that this board of directors was going to be talking about redistricting somewhere, somehow, and it was going to be happening in late summer or early fall. We're in early fall right now. I haven't heard anything too much. East Bay Mud is a special district. It covers both Contra Costa and Alameda counties. They do have a deadline. They do have a timeline. They will have hearings. And they've been open and upfront about their guidelines. And, you know, they've published their timeline, actually. One of their top criteria is incumbent protection, to make sure that incumbents never have to run against one another in the same ward. Right there, right open up front. They're not hiding it. That's being done to a Los Angeles City Council member in North Hollywood right now, and it's very controversial down there. That district is disappearing, and that person's not going to have a job because all of their supporters are being split up. Legislative bodies also need to coordinate with other government boards and agencies, and they need liaison. So that's what do you think happened a couple of days ago? There was a liaison committee with Contra Costa County right here in this park district. And we just heard that there's something going on at Reinhardt Redwood with Supervisor Miley because we don't have, agendized liaison. We have Supervisor Miley in the woods, or no, his staff. So how is it that we have a liaison committee for one county but not the other? Well, I could speculate. Probably have good relations with one of the county's supervisors. That's probably how it happens. But everything is in politics. Everything is personal. It's never business. It's all about personal relationships. And then finally, another part of lawmaking is legislation, and Ordinance 38 is legislation. And you know, I'd like to hear some back. You know, when I send in emails to directors or staff, and I say, put out quotes like, which I've heard so many times. I think, who has not heard the quote, "I don't make the laws, I just enforce them." You know, that quote is out there so often, and I wonder if it's even true. Because when it comes to Ordinance 38, I ask you, who is making the laws? Question number one. Question number two, who should be making the laws? And I'd like to, you know, get some response. I think that these questions deserve answers. I think they're serious questions of law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abreu. Do we have anyone else on the line who would like to make a public comment? Okay, looks like that is the end then. I think we're almost ready to adjourn, Chair Wieskamp.
Eric, I think it would be probably appropriate for you to come back to us, tell us how are we going to become informed shortly on redistricting? I know we had talked about it quite a bit here in the process, so it wouldn't hurt to have an update for us and probably for the whole board. Anybody disagree with that? It is an important issue and we are working on it. Okay, with that, you lady, thanks for getting, Eric.
Noted. And I just wanted to acknowledge the team. Dee, thank you for the comments about the work. And I just want to acknowledge that couldn't be done without the great people that work on this team, you know, from Lisa to Yuli to Flora to Peter and Doug. It's a really great team, and I'm really happy to be working on these issues for the Park District.
And it has not been an easy time to do a lot of things. So thank you one and all. And with that, I declare the meeting adjourned. And I think our next meeting is December. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you all. Take care.